My name is John Cornicello, and I welcome you to my series of photo conversations. I go live most Mondays and Thursdays. Coming up, I have Cheryl Walsh on underwater photography and digital printing. I have Seishu on headshots and personal projects. And then on the 19th, Dale Bernstein, who assisted Irving Penn and Richard Avedon back in the 80s, is going to be my guest here. But today, my guest is celebrity and portrait photographer Greg Gorman, who has a new book out called It's Not About Me, a Retrospective. So please, a warm welcome for Greg Gorman.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. First,
it was fun with the Print Academy with Jeff. We had a good time on good laughs on that. But, you had to be there to really be in the now.
There's a recording of that available if people are brave enough. Well, first we ask you how you're doing with health-wise in the fires. You're in Southern California.
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I mean, definitely you can smell the fires around where I am. I'm kind of up in the Hollywood Hills, but you know, boy, this last week I've seen friends lose wineries, just a tremendous amount of damage, and it's really rough. And you know, of course, a lot of wildfires down here too in the Southland as well.
Yeah, so you've got this new book out. First, I want to ask you what it's like to edit down from so many great images over the years. How do you go through the archives and pick things for a book like this?
Well, 4 years of editing with a year break, it's fair to say. I edited for a little over a year, and then I took a year off to kind of let it kind of settle. And then I went back and started, you know, fine-tuning everything back. As you know, it was mostly negatives and transparencies, mm-hmm. So it was a lot of work.
And yeah, Jeff's holding up the book there.
That John Waters said, it's all about me, but the snapshots are kind of a fun way to do the end pages.
Yeah. Did you do the sequencing and the juxtapositions of the images?
Only a few. Basically, they were done by my collaborator, Gary Johns, who's worked with me very closely on many of my books. He's probably tuned in now. He's probably there somewhere. Mm-hmm. And he basically did most of the brilliant pairings, which was a lot of fun. It was a tough book to edit because I got it down to, and that was a tough edit, to a little over 1,000 pictures. Mm-hmm. And then it became a question of what pictures do I use. So I went sometimes, and this was a more commercial venture, so I went more for the power shots as opposed to some of the artistic shots. But I feel it came out pretty well, and I think it's a good representation of what I basically earned a living doing.
Yeah, I'm going to show some pictures from that. So let me share this other screen here. First, I'm going to start with this Jimi Hendrix. Is this where you started?
I'm not seeing it, but yes, it is. I think I'd rather see the people than me.
Yeah.
But, yeah, with Jimi Hendrix, I borrowed a friend's camera in Kansas City in 1968 to shoot a Jimi Hendrix concert, knowing nothing whatsoever about photography. I borrowed a friend of mine's camera who I used to go hunting and fishing with. And he said, put the camera at a 60th of a second, f5.6 with Tri-X, and you'd probably get a picture. And the following morning, everybody's heard this story. I think people can recite this story. But the following morning, we processed the film in his basement. And when I saw this photo coming up on a blank piece of paper, I was pretty well hooked. It kind of was like this wild image coming out of nowhere. And as I've said in many of my interviews before, I said the picture was slightly out of focus, and I said I didn't realize it was out of focus because the shutter speed was so slow, or I'd smoked too much dope that night. Since it was the 60s and the hip, I had long hair when I had hair, and bell bottoms and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Well, my first experience was worse. It was in high school, just a high school concert. I went to photograph with a film camera that had M and X synchronization on it. I had no idea what they meant for the flash. And another photographer said, well, you're using Tri-X films, so use X, even though it was flash bulbs, which should have been M. So I had a blank roll of film on my first concert.
Well, don't feel bad. The pictures you're seeing on the screen now were actually not the ones I shot in Kansas City, but I shot them at the Devonshire Downs Newport Pop Festival.
Okay.
And to tell you a story, so you all realize that no one's not infallible. I processed the negatives, and I processed negatives all through the 3 days of the concert. I thought, damn, the negatives are coming up awfully thin. And I think I was using Microdalex developer, which was the super fine grain developer, I believe, back then. But the Dectol settings, so the negatives weren't being processed long enough, and the negatives were quite thin. Printing these like on an F4 contrast, F4 paper, I guess.
Yeah, so from there, went to Interview Magazine. Let's see if I can, yeah, we've got new person for
Interview
you.
Magazine was really one of the big boost for my career. I was actually photographing the young gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, Maxwell Caulfield, for Grease 2. And Interview wanted him for a cover, and they knew, I guess everybody has their hands on everything, knew that I was photographing him on an Alan Carr movie. And they contacted me and asked me if I could get him to shoot a cover for Interview. And we did, and that was my first cover, and that was kind of my launch into about a dozen covers for the magazine. Which was a great magazine to work for because we could do our own style. We would choose our own team. They had no say whatsoever in the choice of images. Basically, I would send them a half a dozen pictures and those 6 pictures would run. In case for the covers, which are more broadly lit, they would be shot on a white background and then hand colored by Richard Bernstein, the late Richard Bernstein, and he's the one that did these brilliant covers.
Nice.
But Interview definitely helped, was a launching pad for my career. Absolutely.
And then we went into the sunglasses, the LA
Yeah,
Eyeworks.
that's a perfect follow-up, John, because basically Interview Magazine and LA Eyeworks are probably the 2 elements most responsible for helping launch my career. And ironically, LA Eyeworks is a campaign that was designed by my cousin Jeff Gorman and my dear friend Gary Johns, who art directed most of my books. Are you out there, Gary? I don't know if you're there right now. If you are, speak up and maybe you'll pop up and I'll see you. I don't know. But this was a campaign spearheaded by Gary Johns for a small eyeglass company on Melrose Avenue. And it was great because basically I had totally creative reign and no one told me what I had to shoot, how I had to shoot it. And we had a lot of fun with this campaign. And I found most of the people, it was during the time when I was kind of the flavor of the month and celebrities hadn't figured out that they could make a lot of money as an endorsement. And I got everybody to kind of come on board. And Gary is there, I see. So he's hearing us. And I hit him up pretty early. He's not an early morning guy. He's a late night guy. So I probably thought he's not ready to be seen on screen. But basically, this campaign is a campaign that Gary and I pretty much did together and had a lot of fun doing it. And it definitely helped launch my career with my signature lighting style.
Yeah, did you see Russell Brown's post yesterday of him as Warhol?
I did indeed. Russell called me last night and very nicely asked permission to post the picture. And I said, absolutely, Russell, whatever you want. Russell's great. I've got a great Russell story. When we first met, and I virtually could not even turn on a computer, through a gentleman named Ken Walsh Sharma, who made me an Apple Master back in the beginning, more because I was a photographer, certainly not because I knew anything about digital, which I didn't.
That's right.
Russell didn't want to come up to Mendocino to give me a lesson at that point, and sent all of our mutual friend George Jardine to
Yeah, I know
help me
George.
out. Yeah, and but later on, Russell and I became friends, and we've done a lot of collaborations together. And he's been a great supporter through Adobe for me. So
Yeah, there's Gary.
is Gary coming up? Are we seeing Gary? He's on, I know, because he said he's probably got his camera.
Yeah, I texted with Russell last night, and he said he might stop in as Andy, but I don't think he will. So here is the Andy.
It's kind of ironic because that became my most famous picture, John, on the left. And basically, Andy signed a deal with Ford Models. And when he became a model for Ford, Andy called me up, and I knew Andy a little bit from working with Interview. And I got him a gig in Tootsie, and you probably know. And there's Gary down there. I see Gary now. Hey, Gary. How are you, buddy? You can unmute, buddy.
He is.
He's unmuted. Okay. So basically, Andy called me and asked me if I thought he could do an LA Eyeworks ad. And as you know, that went on to become my most iconic image. And he came to my studio and we shot. Later, he wrote in his diary that my makeup artist and hairdresser, Teddy, the late Teddy Anselin, was the only person who knew how to screw his wig on straight.
So here we see a color and a black and white. Were these shot in color and converted, or did you shoot both?
Oh, no. Back then, I was shooting film. The Eyeworks ad was shot in black and white, and the color was shot in color.
Okay. Do you have a preference for monochrome or color?
What do you think?
When I went through your book, the images I picked were all black and whites.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I this is actually my first book. My last book, which is a book of male portraits and nudes,
Hmm.
was the first time I showcased any color in any of my work, any of my published work. Certainly, a lot of my commercial work was color, but certainly I have a strong preference for black and white.
Yeah, this is a really strong image too.
Now that I shot in New York in the mid '80s with David. David was great. He really understood the value of a solid photograph, and I worked with David for 12 or 15 years, shooting everything pretty much
Let's
during
say
that
there's a
time.
number of pages of David in the book.
Yeah, there's a half a dozen celebrities in the book that I worked with throughout the course of their career and my career, so they got a little bit more ink.
Hmm.
David certainly was one of them.
These
That's
I
Bud
picked.
Cort. Sorry.
Yeah, Bud Cort and Bette Midler. I just picked these because of the eyes closed and still a good contact and connection.
Right. I think a lot of it is just framing a face, and I think it's funny that the name of the catch line in the LA Eyeworks campaign was "Every face is like a work of art; it deserves a great frame." It's just basically assessing a person's face and finding the right angles to play up in the highlights and play down in the shadows.
So let's talk a bit about lighting. I know for a while you used strobe, but I think you're starting to use some LEDs now and continuous lights.
Well, I'm using continuous lights basically all the time, especially now, and I work with an incredible company called Rotolite,
Hmm.
and they've just recently come out with an extraordinary studio light called the Titan X2, which delivers the goods. Plenty of power, tremendous range of color temperatures, 1,400 built-in filters, and it actually has a dial on the front that you can actually dial the degree of the softbox up that you need. It's a spectacular studio light.
What about
I
cameras? Are
like
you?
it, John, because I like it a lot because even in the days of strobe, I was really into continuous light and
Hmm.
natural light. I bought back in the day an Arri 6K and a ballast, which cost me 30 grand. That's what they cost in the day,
Was it
$30,000 a year.
HMI?
HMI, yeah.
Hmm.
And now you've got a light that doesn't have heat, that you can dial the color temperature up and down, and then change your power and not change your color temperature. It's just
Yeah, I have
extraordinary what you can do today.
an HMI story for us was when I was working with Creative Live. We went to New York to do a week series there, and the two on-screen hosts got sunburned from the HMIs.
I mean, and when Jerry, my assistant, works with my light, trying to just get that light up can give you a hernia because of the stand and everything. And if it drops, you're going to lose your hand. You're going to burn yourself if you touch the light. Yet it's still a spectacular light shot through a silk.
Yeah. What about format? I think you've started using some new medium format cameras.
Yeah, I mean, I started my career with 35, moved quickly into Hasselblad, and then then I shot Fuji basically throughout my film career. I was shooting the Fuji 680, and when the realm of digital came on, medium format didn't really make much sense because I was shooting for many years with Canon, which I still use, and Sony, which I use, because you were able to get the quality of a medium format capture with the spontaneity of a 35 millimeter camera, which made shooting 35 made a lot of sense for me shooting celebrities. But at the same time, I was keeping an open mind and looking at most of the medium format cameras coming out, but none of them really panned out for me. The sensors were never as good as the 35 millimeter sensors. The focus was never as good. And you couldn't shoot at a high ISO, so it was a pretty useless. The medium format cameras, all the way through all of them, I'm not going to badmouth any cameras,
Sure.
but they just weren't worthwhile. And then basically through the lecture series that George Novacci did, where we were all talking and donating our speaker fees to COVID, I saw a couple of speakers speak about the camera, and I fell in love with this, the Fuji GFX 100, which is just an extraordinary. Michael Clark was shooting it for his extreme sports stuff. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty cool camera. He's got to be able to focus pretty fast. He's got to be able to shoot under low light. And the real question for me, John, was whether or not the camera was balanced. I mean,
Hmm.
for me, the Hasselblad is a great studio camera if you're shooting product, but it's not an easy camera to handhold. And the Fuji GFX 100 is an extremely balanced, not overly heavy camera. And it's kind of ironic I've come back to Fuji after all these years.
Nice.
I love the camera, and it's really giving me everything I'm looking for.
So here's an interesting photo from the book. It's very different than
Yeah,
other
absolutely.
things.
Ironically, this picture was taken with a Fuji 617, which was
Okay.
a camera that I had bought as a gift for my first assistant at the time, Kevin Lynch. And I said, can I borrow your camera? I've got to do like one of these big studio shots in Cannes for the 50th anniversary of the Cannes Film Festival. Everybody that's anybody at the time is in this picture. All the stars of big European cinema, from Polanski to Dominic Sanda, Nukame, every director from Scorsese, Coppola, Altman, Costa Gavras. You got Michelangelo Antonioni, Gina Lollobrigida, and on, Ben Benders. They're all here, Bernardo Bertolucci. Anyway,
So what
the
was it
irony
like?
behind this shot was that we set up 16 power packs and 24 heads to get it lit evenly. You know, this is film. We're talking about 1997. And I also shot with a long focal length lens on the Fuji because I needed to bring that back row forward. Had I used a wider lens, you know, this would have looked terrible. So
Right.
I'm using a long optic. And we had everything set. I rehearsed it for, believe it or not, for 3 days because this is film. There was no give and take. It was going to be for Perry Match. And 15 minutes before all these people walked in, the police came in, the gendarmes with German shepherds, knocked half the gear over. So trying to get everything set back up
Wow.
and done and keep my composure. I was directing in French, was pretty crazy. So, but we pulled it off. And everybody's eyes are open. There's no strips in here. Nothing changed. That's an original capture.
Congratulations. That's quite something. How big was the room for you to be able to get back that far?
I was quite a ways away from him. I was on a stage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was back, you know, probably, I don't know, 50 feet maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know whether it was that much.
Yeah, we'd have to be.
Yeah.
So you also have a lot of work with Michael Jackson.
We worked together over the years many times, and I feel he was pretty misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly not condoning any of his actions, but we had a great time working together, and he was incredible. You know, he didn't show up with a big entourage, and he came in, and one of the things that was great about working with Michael is he had a great creative sense. And on both of these occasions, these are from 2 different shoots, he had concepts. He came to me, called me one time. He said he loved the shot of Gloria Swanson with the netting and really wanted to try something in that vein. That shot, I think, with Stieglitz or Stieglitz shot, I think. And so that's the shot on the left. The shot on the right, he said, you know, Greg, I have these pet tarantulas, and they've just shed their skin. And he said that the shell of the tarantula looks just like them. So he brought a couple of them, and my my stylist at the time, we gaffers taped that actually to his head.
Very effective. I just love the lighting on here on Boris and Martina here.
The picture on the left was actually a shot I did of Martina during an LA Eyeworks shot on the left. And the shot on the right was during a campaign I did for the Laureate Sports Awards with Boris Becker. But again, kind of my signature lighting.
Mm-hmm.
Boris Becker, you know, has a pretty full face. So you really achieve this more, you know, he's a handsome guy, but you more achieve the sculpted look by really shooting a profile, and you don't really get the effect. He has a very big head.
Yeah, I love that style, just right up close to the light so it falls off quickly.
Yeah, one of the things that's been amazing for me is that with the new Fuji GFX 100, they make a 250 millimeter lens that focuses extremely close, and I can shoot this tight on with that camera, and that's really been my lens of choice. I've been coming in extremely tight and loving the focal length of that specific lens with the Fuji.
Yeah. And this one here, I was just wondering what this juxtaposition was about.
Well, let me tell you, I know I've been stepping on your lines. I haven't given you a minute to talk, John. That's me. I'm a chatty Cathy.
That's good.
This is a very funny story, and this is a good story. So Catherine Bigelow on the right, a very good old friend of mine. I'd worked with her on Hurt Locker, and did some pictures for her on that with Jeremy Renner. Shot the poster actually. And the gentleman on the left is the late King of Tonga. And I had done a shoot with him around the time that a friend of mine had done a documentary on him. He came over from Tonga, and we hit it off famously. And he's a big wino like me. we sat and drank a lot of wine after dinner and hung out. And he came back about a year later, and I shot a Christmas card for him and a couple of things. We were hanging out, drinking some wine, and he said, "Greg, let's go to the Tower Bar for dinner." I said, "Okay." So he called, got a reservation. We went there. Long story short, we sat at our table in the corner, had dinner, and as we were leaving, I saw Catherine Bigelow sitting at a table with some studio execs, and this was the year of the Academy Awards that she was nominated for Hurt Locker. And I said to King George Tupelo V, the King of Tonga on the left, I thought he might enjoy meeting her. So I said, "Would you like to meet?" I said, "KG," called him King George, KG. "Would you like to meet Catherine Bigelow? She's got a pretty good shot at winning an Academy Award." And he goes, "Sure." And so I take him over to the table, interrupt them. Larry Marks and a bunch of people are sitting there. And I said, "Catherine, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. This is the King of Tonga." I didn't really think anything more about it that night. And about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, I get a phone call from Catherine. And she says, "You're not going to believe this, Greg." I said, "What?" She says, "I eat every Sunday night at the Tower Bar, and I always sit at the corner table, which they reserved for me. And tonight when I came in, they said, 'I'm sorry, Miss Bigelow, but your table has been taken by the King of Tonga.'" So that's the juxtaposition of this picture, which I think is quite funny. Gary, are you getting bored? You've heard all these stories 100 times, huh? You can recite them, but I can't hear you.
You're muted, Gary. There.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. The stories, Greg, are unbelievably and so absolutely fresh every time I hear them.
Oh, you're so full of shit. Your eyes are brown. So
So
anyway,
here's another
Anyway.
set without the eyes and with the interesting compositions.
yeah, that's Tim Curry on the left. And I like the feeling of the picture. And the one on the right is Sonia
Sonia.
Braga. And I must say that, and this is an interesting point, John, I think, to make. And I think Gary will back me up on this. In revisiting work that I shot 30, 40, 50 years ago, my point of view and my perspective changed quite a bit. And I found that it wasn't the more carefully orchestrated portraits, let's say, that I had accomplished or published throughout my career, but it was more the moments in between that I think Gary and I had fun looking at and putting together for this project.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures that basically I would have ignored before.
So this brings me to the importance of shadows and shading.
Definitely, I mean, here, this was during a shoot for the LA Eyeworks ad, and I wanted some pictures of Philip Glass without glasses. And he had a really pronounced nose and a strong face. And I just think one of the things that I've always said is not what you say in the highlights, but what you don't say in the shadows that bring people back to pictures more often than not. And I know, certainly from the beginning of my career, where I basically overlit everything and everything looked like interchangeable postage stamps and left nothing to the imagination, that it wasn't until with Tom Waits in the late 70s that I started to develop my own personal style that I realized the importance of shadows and highlights and how they interplay off of each other.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I enjoy from you is, "I couldn't shoot anything that couldn't talk back to me." And I feel the same way. People try to get me to go out and do landscapes, and I just don't see them.
Yeah, I've never been able to, if I can't relate to something, it's very, very difficult for me to do a picture. I become anxiety-ridden and anxious. And I think, having been a personality photographer for over 50 years, a lot of the challenges for me when I was really into it were bringing people, coming up or down to somebody's level to get them to, for me to get what I want out of the picture. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. More often than not, I got it. I think that's attributed to my Midwest upbringing. But I think the challenge sometimes to deal with people that, are known as difficult people. Usually the people that you hear are difficult are not. They're just discerning and they haven't gotten to where they are by being yes people. But, once in a while you do run that challenge of someone that's, not the easiest person to photograph or the easiest person to communicate with. And that's part of the challenge. But I think that's probably why I've really never really enjoyed shooting inanimate objects.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a couple of people that you've worked with that you didn't enjoy the process.
Well, that's in everybody's life. We've
Yeah.
all worked with people, whether you're a photographer or a mechanic or a plumber, it doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
We've all had people that were not people that were like basically
Yeah.
our flavor of the month, but that we connected with. And
Yeah,
like
so-
I've always been reminded, and what I've told people is I said, don't judge someone based on what you hear about them. Judge them on your own personal relationship and interaction with them, because you don't know if the person got laid the night before, if their dog got run over by a car. You don't know the circumstances to which
Mhm.
you're meeting a person. And it's always different for people. And some people have an affinity for connecting with people and some people don't. But I always say, you know, the challenge is come into it with an open book and an open mind, and then take it from there. If they end up being an asshole, then they're an asshole. But
Yeah.
give them the benefit of the doubt when you get going.
Is there anyone you've wished to photograph that you didn't get a chance to, or something just couldn't come together?
Yeah, I always wanted to shoot Bridget Bardot. You know, of
Mhm.
all the big sex symbols back in the day before I became gay, I guess, that I really loved. You know, I always loved Bridget Bardot, Sophia Loren, and Gina Lollobrigida. Well, I shot Sophia Loren. I had Gina Lollobrigida over to my house for dinner a few times, and John Waters always made the joke that he felt she was humor impaired at one point during dinner one night, and she was in her kind of faux Versace dress with overly done makeup, and she's sitting next to me, and everybody had a few libations. John Waters leans across the table. Oh, just lost everybody here. Hold on.
No, I still see you.
There we go. There I am. John Waters leans across the table to Gina Lollobrigida, who took herself quite seriously. And John says, "Have you ever thought about acting in horror films?" That was a classic one-liner.
So when you're working with someone, is it the process or the product for you? Photography.
Oh, it's certainly both.
Hmm.
The product comes from the process, obviously. And so a lot of what you see on the screen is a result of a lot of yip yap and jabberish and camaraderie, which is a big part, because of course, getting into what I do, it's winning their trust and confidence to kind of get them to open up and to get inside the facade. You know, most celebrities and musicians for that matter are much more comfortable playing a character other than themselves. And when it comes
Mhm.
time to be who they are, it's more difficult outside of the facade of an alter ego.
Yeah. So here's a musician.
Well, Frank, I worked with, Frank Zappa, I worked with for many, many years, did many, many projects with Frank. And this was probably one of his very last photo sessions. He was conducting, I think, the music for Edgar Varese with I believe the Berliner Philharmonic. And
Hmm.
he called me up and asked if I would come down and just take some behind the scenes pictures. And that's where I shot this picture. I love Frank. Frank wasn't a drugger or a drinker or anything. I mean, he just was a
Yeah,
dad that
a
we
pretty
lost.
amazing person.
Brilliant.
There's a question in the comments from David. Can you have Greg comment on his use of negative space as opposed to the tight crops? What drives your decision on that?
The image, the person, and use of negative space. And this is a good thing, David, to touch on is, you know me, and if I do use negative space, or I have a frame that's not where I'm not on top of somebody, like if you look at me on the screen right now, I'm centered right in the middle of the camera, which I would never do in a picture.
Mhm.
I think I hate this balance left and right. I would slam me over to the right or over to the left and as evidence, John, in my book and in many of the pictures, that when Gary did the layout, when we could afford to give up the page, which we didn't give up very many in this book, we would play a negative space, but we always, in that case, had the personality pinned to either the left or right page. I like a lot of negative space, David, going left or right. I don't like, I hate a picture like where you look at me, the symmetry of me right in the middle of the frame. I think it kills the impact of the photograph.
So we all know you for your photography, but there's other things you like to do, like fishing.
Just came back, John, from, as you know, I think from a week of fishing in Wyoming, which was spectacular. And my assistant, Jerry, had never really been too much out of LA, at least in the United States. And I think it wasn't even the first evening he looked at me and he says, "God, I see why you said you could just give it all up in Hollywood at this stage of your life and get a cabin on a lake with a boat." And I said, "You got it." You know, it's just, there's something about that open air. And it's probably that Midwest upbringing growing up in Kansas, but it's just,
Yeah.
there's a sense of freedom, there's a sense of beauty, and a sense of something that's being radically destroyed by the gentleman, I would hardly use that word, in office to destroy our country.
Yeah, yeah. What
So I
about
love
teaching?
fishing. I've made wine for many years. You know,
Yeah,
now
you're
I'm
known
mostly
for your
teaching.
parties.
Good dinner parties. It's always fun to put. Yeah, that was a big one. That one at the top. We do that. John Waters and I always did these parties every year. Everybody always thought John and I were boyfriends. We would go to events, and everybody always, because we would always be each other's beards at all the parties over the Academy Award week, and everybody thought we were a couple, and everybody said, "That's so nice to see you guys are still together after all these years." I've known John 40 years, but every year during the Academy Awards, I would host a dinner party at my house, and this is a dinner party I had, and you can see it's Johnny Depp, and at the time he was married to Vanessa Paradis, and Ricky Lake and Elton, and Patty Hearst in the front row with her husband, who was her bodyguard during the trials, behind her. Marcus Hugh on the back is the owner, and his mother from Strand. Melanie Griffith in the red. Patrick Cox, great designer, and my lawyer's wife in the foreground. So that's kind of I always get a mixed bag of people for dinner parties, but found it's always kind of fun.
Whoops. And there you are with the fish.
There I am with my wine, and there I am with a bass that I caught on a fishing trip to Florida. I was going down there coaching. I think Jeff went down. Jeff, didn't you go down and coach that guy in near Orlando, Florida, in Mount Dora? He's a wealthy businessman who flew a bunch of the big digital guys down to give him digital lessons, and he knew I liked wine and fishing, so that was a home run for me.
Oh, yeah, we did. That was a very bizarre trip.
Oh, the time when we all went? Yeah, that was crazy, huh?
It looks like Mueller wants to say something.
Yes.
All right, Mike. Mike was a person, let me give you a little Mike intro for those of you that don't know Mike. Mike was Captain Explorer with the Explorers of Light with Canon for many years, and he had the genius of putting together real photographers back then, not internet sensations that believe their own fame and notoriety by being talentless schmucks that buy membership to be on it. And we had a long run, Mike, and you were very generous to all of us.
And Greg, we're still running because we became a family. But
yes, we
go
did.
back to that picture of the largemouth bass and the vineyard.
Sure, hang on a second. It's on my other computer here.
So Greg, 2 questions.
Yeah.
Which do you prefer, the largemouth bass or the trout?
Largemouth bass. But ironically, Mike, one of my dearest friends, Kent Fleury, who I grew up with in Kansas City, got me going up to Wyoming every year. And I must say that the trips, I like the outdoors, and the trips on the rivers, floating the rivers, you know, in a drift boat on the North Platte in Saratoga, Wyoming is pretty spectacular. And every year I go in October, and the bass fishing is less frequent, but that's what I grew up knowing in Kansas City, you know.
Right.
You know, when you and fishing down there in Florida, I caught lots of lunkers, but also down there they fish with live bait, and it's a wild process. But that's not really me either. I'd rather cast a little lure out and catch a fish that way. So.
And you're a catch and release person?
100%. I mean, we didn't lose one fish. Kent and I caught a couple hundred fish that last week, and we didn't lose a fish.
And then the image on the right, that's you in the vineyard.
Yep, that's actually that's in the vineyard where I made some Pinot for 1 year up at Ampelos. But I mainly made Cabernet with Dave Finney of Orange Swift fame up in Napa.
How much of the vineyards for your product
2 rows
have been I don't want to say ruined, but the smell of the smoke in the grape?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not making wine since 2018, so I honestly don't know. I don't know if they've had smoke taint so much.
Why did you stop?
I'm sorry?
Why did you stop making wine?
Really because Cabernet became much more difficult to sell, and especially high-priced Cab, which mine was because of the small production. And like many others, my palate had changed. I drink more Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, Sancerre, Rosé. I don't drink so much of the big heavy wine. Sure, with a steak and stuff, it's nice to have a big ballsy wine, but I drink lighter wines, much lighter wines. So they're more food friendly and easier. I know. Mike says, boy, I wish we were into that when Canon was paying the bills. It's been a lot more reasonable than what Seth and I used to order, huh? Seth mainly.
But wait a minute. So why didn't you switch over to a rosé or a Chenin Blanc?
Why did I?
Why didn't you?
Back then?
Even now?
Well, now I do. Now I do drink all those.
No. Produce.
Because I was already so deeply in bed, and I had my contracts for the Cabernet. So I actually looked at making a Pinot, and we did a blend with some really great fruit from the Santa Rita Hills. But the cost was so high with what we made, we didn't feel we could. It was. I think my cost, my wholesale was going to have to be close to $50 a bottle wholesale. I mean, I would have made money at that, but to wholesale at 50, to retail it at 75 or 80. It's too much for a Pinot when you can buy great Pinots today for less money. So I didn't do it.
Okay.
So Greg, what's next for you? Think you have another project going on?
Working on another project now with Gary, which I am keeping under wraps, but I will tease you with saying I always swore I would never shoot an inanimate object, and I will tell you that Gary and I have come up with a fantastic project that's going to be a joint project between us that will entail me shooting something other than a live subject in front of my camera, and I'll leave it at that.
Cadavers.
Cadavers, right. I talked to Joel Peter Witkin. He's sitting me by.
Oh,
No.
I don't know how many people know Joel Peter Wicken's work.
Oh, I
Interesting.
love Joel's work.
Yeah. So going even further back, who were some of your early influences?
Well, a very early influence, and who became a very dear friend, certainly was Helmut Newton.
Mhm.
I remember meeting him at his first big show in LA with White Women was the name of the book, and it was at Nick Wilder's gallery. And I met him in June that night and went on to become good friends, and actually had a couple of shows with Helmut in June's room at the museum in Berlin over the last few years. Obviously, big fan of Avedon, big fan of Penn, big fan of Hero, big fan of Horst. God, I mean, Bresson,
Yeah.
Versailles. I mean, I can keep going on and on. But
Right, Hero came out of Avedon Studio.
out of Avedon School, and I'm drawing a total blank. The other guy I loved, who I thought was so great, I was a big fan of, mostly color. Who was the guy that shot all the shoes? I don't know why I'm so brain dead on this one.
So,
That'd be
Huh?
Guy Bourdon.
Guy Bourdin, exactly. Big fan. And,
Yeah, for those who came in late, my guest on the 19th is going to be Dale Bernstein, who assisted both Penn and Avedon. I think he also worked with Arnold Newman and a couple other big names back in the 80s. So I'm hoping that that'd be an interesting conversation.
I think it'll be great. I'm definitely looking forward to tuning
Yeah.
in.
I know Greg has another call in 10 or 15 minutes, so.
I'm okay. I'm okay, actually. It's 11:30, so I'm okay.
Okay, but do other people have some questions they want to ask? You
No,
can
let's go
unmute
for it.
and jump in and be part of the conversation. Jim made a
Go to
comment.
a gallery view.
Yeah, let me stop the share here.
I like seeing people when I'm talking to
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
So Michael Lynch said your book's about to arrive today.
Greg, not so much now, but early on, as you introduced your nude work, did you get blowback from commercial clients because of that?
No, I think if anything, I did publish a very rude book of a boyfriend of mine that my office said, "You will never work again." After I did a book called Just Between Us. My assistant said, "Not anymore." On a boyfriend of mine at the time, Greg Knutson, which was a pretty wild book. That might have taken a little, I might have gotten a little heat from that. Most of them I didn't, but I think if you look at the realm of figure study work in this country versus Europe, I mean, people in America are so hypocritical. They're the first ones to dismiss it, and they're the first ones behind closed doors looking at it. Just very hypocritical. But it actually helped work for me in Europe. I did a lot of campaigns for fragrances and whatnot in Europe involving figure study work.
Hey, Greg, this is Joe. I admit, not having seen much of your work in the past, but you mentioned what you referred to as your signature lighting, and you talked a little bit about the shadows. I'd just be interested to hear, what do you really try and get out of the, what is it about the way you use lighting that helps you really get what you want out of your photographs?
Well, I basically, Joe, prior to, you should leave yourself on mic in case you want to play off of me while we're talking about all this. It might be more helpful for you.
Sure, no problem.
Prior to going into a photo session, I'll sit, if I don't know the talent, I mean, you know, fortunately with a 50-year career, the bulk of the people I've shot many times. So I learned the right angles and what to do. And it's like, that's why a lot of us that did celebrity work back then held on to the same clients. Like I would go shoot Warren Beatty. He knew that he could relax because he knew I knew the angles. He knew I knew what time to get there, what lenses to use. And it just starts the session on a much more elevated level. And in terms of knowing what I wanted to do, if it's a person I didn't know, Joe, I would try to spend time during hair and makeup, just sitting there and having a conversation, building a relationship and a rapport, and try to look at which angles I want to play up in the highlights, which angles I want to play down in the shadows. And you can tell that by looking if a nose bends one way, if the person has a smaller eye, double chin, balding head, you bring a flag in. You know, it's all just like a lot of different elements that you have to put together, and you look for the lesser of two evils to kind of put it all together. And then that whole process can completely change once you start. How I go about it, Joe, is when I'm shooting, I begin in very close, pretty much on top of the person, so that I can, one, build a relationship, and two, really study the face. I can't get that if I start on a full-length shot.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Great. Yeah, it's just interesting to hear how you approach that stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up another, we were talking about pushing the person off to the side here, so I'm going to bring another image up in here.
Yeah, this is Helen Mirren, and it's just, I think here, that negative space leads you into her, John. If she was in the middle, it's like a seesaw, just like where you're seeing me on the screen. I'm in the middle. You don't have a real take. Pushing her to the edge of the frame creates an element of tension that I think is important. I know that today, a lot of the younger kids and a lot of the street photographers like the idea of pictures centered, having all that information around the person, but I find it disruptive.
So where is the book available?
It's available on Amazon. I think it's available on another site. I don't know. Is it Alibris?
I'm not sure.
You should check it out. I think it's like 30% less on that site. So that, Gary and I were kind of annoyed about that. But the good news is that Amazon, and leave that up, we'll talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
Amazon, this is a good picture to talk about. Amazon had it discounted, Gary. We saw it on Amazon, discounted a little bit. Now they've got it back up to full retail, so that's a good sign. I think the book's doing okay. It's just been released. I think the big problem at the beginning was supply and demand. I didn't get my books until just a few weeks ago. Anyway, the picture up now is the last picture I put in the book. I think you chose well for us, stuff for us to talk about, John. You obviously did your homework, which always makes me happy when I'm not always doing the same pictures and the same this and that.
I know. I wrote to Greg yesterday, and I said, what photos do you want to show? And he said, you pick them. So this is not rehearsed.
No, it's not rehearsed. And I really didn't even look at it because I really don't. I'm fine to talk about anything. I'm a pretty open book. But RJ, better known, I guess, as Robert Wagner. Hi, Cheryl.
Oh, hi. You can continue. I have a question after that.
We'll get to it. So anyway, RJ is a friend of mine also for 40 years. His daughters happen to be very close friends of mine. That's how we met many, many years ago. I actually photographed his wife, Jill St. John, before any of us met, when she had her sweater companies and was living in Aspen. Anyway, long story short, the daughter, Katie Wagner, is one of my dear friends, called me and asked me if I could do a picture of the three girls for his 90th birthday. And it was just going to be the three girls, and the three girls went on to their kids, and the kids went on to having his wife in the picture, which, you know, where I'm leading, went on to, well, we might as well put our dad in the picture. So I said, you know, I'm totally down. I said, but you know what? I shot your dad so many friggin' times, and they're all these saccharine, heart-to-heart, you know, cheese grin, Robert Wagner, pretty boy pictures. And I said, Gary and I couldn't, Gary will tell you, we couldn't find a picture of Robert Wagner for the book that I like, and I really wanted him in the book. But the pictures were like saccharine pictures. They were just, everything was lit, nothing to the imagination. I said, I want some time with your dad, Katie, to do a hardcore picture. And all three daughters said, oh my God, we would love that. So long story short, shot with a road light, negative space in the picture, strong side light. I got this picture, and I think it captures his essence. His sex appeal is certainly there at 90. My God. His boyish charm.
He's 90 years old?
90.
90.
Yes, and there's like virtually no retouching on this. And basically, very little retouch. We took out stray hairs.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, this captured what I wanted more than anything. And he's so thrilled. It's so great because I talk to RJ like every week. He calls up and checks up on me, Mike, as you know, on everything. And he's just the greatest guy in the world. And he's so happy to be in the book. I just sent him a book yesterday, actually. So I'm very proud of that picture. That's
Nice.
definitely, and that's shot with the Fuji, with the 250, and the Titan light. So it's all the new stuff.
Great. So Cheryl, you had a question.
Yes, hello. I joined late, so I don't know if you covered this, but first, I'm a huge fan. I have the book Framed.
Yes, my LA Eyeworks campaign, yeah.
Yes, which I love. I've just gotten started with portrait photography.
Okay.
So from looking at the photos, you used hard light or hard?
Yes, I use a spot grid.
A spot grid.
We didn't cover that. And we can talk a little bit about that book. And Gary Johns, I don't know if you can see him. Hold on.
There he is.
Gary's in the far left-hand corner on my screen in the red shirt, if you see him, kind of orange shirt. Cheryl, when you design a campaign to create a look, you want to develop a signature style for that campaign so that when you see it, it's built basically on one word, repetition. So the entire campaign was shot with a spot grid light, which is a small round, it's a strobe, it's your strobe head with a cone on the light and then a grid in front of that. And the grids were usually at 10 degree, Gary, I think 10 degrees, sometimes at 20, and one simple light in the center on the background. So that whole campaign, and you're absolutely 100% right, Cheryl, so you're on the right track. You're obviously learning. That whole campaign was shot with hard light, honey. Okay, great. And what camera did you use? What brand? Back then, I was shooting with a Hasselblad. Now I'm shooting with a GFX 100 from Fuji. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Here, I'm just going to bring up those images again.
You know, Greg, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I happen to have a copy of the limited edition that's coming out. If you'd like me to show that, I will.
Sure. I showed before we got started today, Gary, I showed John and I think David Robertson, who's a dear friend, who's taken many of my classes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But Gary basically has designed many of my books. One thing we didn't talk about is the importance of working with an art director and a person that you know, like you know your own son or your daughter, because they are the most capable of understanding who you are as an artist and best capable of being able to edit your work and express your point of view. Just a quick story, and then I'm going to turn this over to Gary for a moment to talk about the importance of art direction, is when I was editing this book and I went to Munich, where we published the book with Hendrik Tenois, Hendrik said, you know, wanted to see the pictures, and he didn't know me very well, but he had seen my gallery shows and wanted to do the book. And he said that he get a copy of all the pictures and he would do the edit for the book. And I mean, I knew that wouldn't fly, but I humored him and gave him a drive with 1,000 pictures on it. The next morning he came in, he said to me, Greg, I've made this edit and I think it's a pretty good edit because it's, you know, our market really is pretty people. And I've gone through this and I said, wow, I really didn't realize that my career was based on shooting pretty people. Needless to say, Tenois was great to work with. They gave us total creative reign, never a problem. But Gary, why don't you touch on the importance of understanding an artist before you delve into basically creating a project with him? Everybody's commented, but you've been here. He did all the pairings, the design of the limited edition, and we've done a half a dozen books together.
I think where I have the advantage is that I know Greg really well, and I know his work very well, and I've worked with him for, oh God, I don't even know how long, but Greg and I have known each other since the mid-70s. So I'm familiar with probably every photograph he's taken, even back when he was living in a small apartment on Laurel Canyon with 7-foot ceilings or something like that, and had to stand in the hallway to shoot, you know, Iggy Pop or whoever was there at the time. For me, in designing a book, it's very simple, and it's especially when you're dealing with photography. I don't want my design to get in the way of the images. For me, a book of photography is all about the imagery. It's not about the design. So although I'm flattered when people say, oh, I love this, I love that, I'm really more flattered whenever they don't even mention the design and they talk about how well the images work together, or how, just Greg's shots are so great. It makes me feel good because I don't want them to say, like, there's some terrific designers out there, but they put their mark on everything. It's like, oh, you know that that's a David Carstner. You know who these designers are because of what they do. I'm not that person.
You know, I had that problem, Gary. We've had this conversation. This is kind of an interesting conversation. And it's exactly what, I'll let you come back in, but I did a book of young male nudes in a book called As I See It. And the company that published it, I think it was the one in New York, it's not one that I particularly like, the guy, gave it to a very famous art director, and I don't want to mention his name, but he was a big one and did a lot of Bruce Weber's books. And the layout, and I'm an openly gay person, so it's not me being necessarily homophobic, but the layout, the concept of the book was not that this was a gay book of male nudes, but it was a book of beautiful portraits. And the book came back, the layout that they designed was so gay. I said, this doesn't represent who I am, doesn't represent my pictures. You can label it or tag it however you want, but it was not my focus for the book. And we ended up taking it away and giving it, I had 2 girls I interviewed, and ended up going to this one girl who did the layout, and the layout was stunning. And it was all the juxtaposition of the pictures, how everything worked out. We had the same problem, Gary, with in their youth, art directors trying to put too much of their stamp on it. So go ahead, Gary. But that, having someone, in terms of even having your gallery exhibitions, I'm always at my shows for all my books. It's all very, very important. You can take over. I just want to make that point.
Yeah. So, I was just saying, so in terms of when I work with Greg, for me, it's all about the photography. I want that to be the star. I don't want the design to be the star. And sure, and I take a lot of joy in when Greg and I collaborated on this. We took some photographs that were, I don't know, not so great. Greg would admit that. They were from early in his career, but we managed to crop them in ways that Greg had never really imagined before, and and put them on a page in a way that made them look fresh. So I like that aspect of that's one of the things that I was able to contribute a bit in terms of the book.
You saved a lot of pictures, but don't tell them that.
But the truth is, that I think that art directors can do that for you. Photographers, they see things a certain way, and they're great photographers, but they're also people that look at an image and say, have you thought about doing it this way? And sometimes it creates when you're doing a book, there's a pacing that's required, especially a book like Greg's book. You need to have a pacing. You don't want there to be, spots where people go to sleep because every image is the same. Every crop is the same. Everything, it just takes on this monotonous nature. So I hope you all be able to buy the book and take a look, but there's this pacing that we've been able to achieve where sometimes the images are big, sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're color, sometimes they're black and white. And it's the mix. And it's also the juxtaposition of how the images work in the book, as well as the placement in the book. In fact, I think we never even had an argument when we said, how are we going to start the book? David Bowie with that, where he's hiding his face. It was just such an obvious way of all of Greg's images to show that particular image to open the book. Plus, he wanted to open it with a bang. And let's face it, David Bowie is a big guy. So all of those things come into play whenever you're designing a book. But the most important thing, I think, is the pacing, the juxtaposition of images, and staying out of the way when you're designing, so that you don't become a factor. You don't want someone saying, look at how they handled the type on that image. I mean, if that's your point, if that's the kind of guy you are, well, that's great. But Greg is not that kind of a photographer. I like to present Greg's work. Here's Greg's work. Love it or don't. It's as simple as that. There you
Great.
go.
Thank you for adding into this, Gary.
My pleasure.
Sure.
And I do, if it is appropriate, and I'm not forcing this on you because I don't even get a share of this, but I will show this book, the limited edition thing, because some people in this they're obviously interested in Greg. They might be interested in this particular, you know, it's a pretty nice thing. So
It
anyway,
comes with a print too, right?
yeah, let me just, is it okay if I show it now, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this, you know, Greg and I put together this. I hope you all can see it. I'm going to try to do it. You know, and it's a linen cover. It has this tipped image here, and it's really nice. You know, that it's a sort of a current sort of brownish rusty color. And then inside, of course, you get the book, right? And of course, it's signed and numbered and all that kind of stuff in the here. And it's the book. And then along with that, you get a little portfolio in here, which has a certificate of authenticity. And when you open this up, here's the print that comes with the book, and it's the shot of Alfred Hitchcock. So it's a very handsome, you know, very handsome product. You know, all sort of, you know, we're so used to doing everything in black, and it was sort of fun to break out of the mold and do something kind of colorful and with a certain kind of
Nice.
taste involved. So that's it.
Cool.
You know,
Well, thank you.
$9.95 at your local bookstore.
You're hired, Gary. Good pitch. Hey, Mike, how are you? I thought you were off taking pictures. When are you leaving? Unmute yourself.
muted.
Me?
There you are.
Whenever I get to go back to Spain, it's whenever they
Yeah.
open up. Probably May of next year. We're targeting
It's
right
pretty
now.
bad over there. My old boyfriend's Spanish. He's from Barcelona, and he's over there now, and it's pretty rough. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're waiting for the green light, and then probably May, and then
Yeah.
finish in the middle of June.
Cool.
So yeah, thanks for remembering.
Well,
I remember we've talked.
I got your book coming today. I can't wait to see it.
Awesome.
we're coming up on the top of the hour, and as usual in these presentations amongst friends, Jeff Shewy has something to share.
Well, two things. First of all, I wanted to find out from Greg what the deal was with the print being upside down on the back and right side up on the front.
Talk to
'Cause
Gary.
I thought that was actually pretty creative.
It was
That's
just
why you
a-
have a creative director, Jeff.
Well, you know, it's deliberate, obviously. You know, we don't even have a title of the book on the front. You know, it's only on the spine. So here we have this fabulous shot of Grace Jones, and we said, hey, why don't we just flip it and put it on the back? And because at one point I had this sort of weird ass idea, and I think it really is a weird ass idea, is to make the book work from both covers. Like when you're looking at it one way, you're looking at all these great black and white shots. And then when you turn the book over and you look at it the other way, like a Japanese book or so, they're all color. But you know, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But
I'm kind of like tripping on a shag rug. It's too much. You know, it's
Yeah, it's too much,
over
right.
designed. Yeah.
so it's really just a design element. And let's face it, the picture of Grace is a great image. So there you go. That's all it was to it. Just
So, Greg,
Yeah.
do you see this picture?
Yeah, it was with you, Jeff. And that was bigger than 45 pounds. It was, I think, 52 or 56 pounds. We thought it was like
Well, I don't know. I remember it as 45, and I think it grew as you.
all right, it was a big ass sea bass.
200 pounds now, right?
with
Yeah.
Photoshop, I can make that look about like 450 pounds if you'd like.
But the interesting thing is we were fishing with your brother in the morning, and we actually found a place that you could get the fish cleaned, and I've got pictures of the fish being cleaned, and then we actually ate it for dinner. So
We had planned a dinner party that night, Jeff, and we went fishing that morning. We said, God, I hope we catch some fish we can eat for dinner.
yeah. Well, I caught fish. I think I caught the bait that you used to catch your big fish.
There you go.
So I thought I wanted to show that very briefly. There we go.
We were trolling for sharks, as I recall, and we got lucky and got the sea bass. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
I had a nice hit, but nothing came of it.
Cool.
So I just wanted to congratulate you, Greg, on the book. And when I first saw it, I saw the PDF, and it was like quite impressive to see the body of work in kind of its totality and mixing the color and the black and white, which normally you don't do. It was actually refreshing to see some of your color work. And although it's not as dramatic, because back in the old days, you couldn't have the same kind of control over the color images that you would have over black and white in the dark room.
Yeah. Transparency's never had anywhere close to the latitude that digital has in terms of.
And varying the contrast back then was much more difficult, much easier to do now in Photoshop.
That's why one of the questions I had earlier was about the Andy Warhol picture. Did I shoot them all in color or black and white? And I said, no, obviously I did my more dramatic lighting in black and white, although I shot a lot of color in black and white. I mean, a lot of color with dramatic light, but you had to know going into it, your limitations. Yeah.
Great. Does anyone else have any last comments or questions they want for Greg?
Gorman is brilliant. You're just brilliant, Greg.
Oh yeah, I miss our dinners, Mike. I miss our dinners. I miss you.
I miss
Gary,
you.
the guy above you on the thing, do you see Mike Mueller, Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah, he started with Jeff and I and a million photographers, the Explorers of Light for Canon. And he hosted the most spectacular dinners with an open bar tent with the greatest wines and the most fun. We had so much fun when they had real, like we said earlier, real photographers. I mean, they had Arnold Newman and on and on and on, all the great photographers.
Resnick.
Yeah, a lot of them. Wilkes,
I mean,
Wilkes, all of them. Now, it's a bunch of internet sensations that don't know the fucking difference between an f-stop and a shutter speed.
Well, you know what really is amazing to me is that I started that thing in December of 1993. And here we are in October 2020. Back in 1993, did you know Jeff Sheewey?
Probably, right?
Um,
Soon after.
I think I may have met Greg because of my involvement in APA.
APA, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, what ended up happening, and let me just give a tout for Michael's miscreant spending of Canon's money. Basically, he assembled a great collection of photographers that by and large maybe knew a few of each other, but didn't, as a whole, didn't know each other.
Exactly.
And because of the association with Canon and the fact that we would get together at photo events and trade shows like Photo Plus, it became a real friendship with a bunch of us. I mean, Jack Resnicki and Seth Resnick and I are still great friends. At one point, I was president of APA. Jack was president of PP of A, and Seth was president of EP, editorial photographers.
Right.
And so Michael really had kind of a steering hand of
Very
helping,
early vision.
Yeah,
Yeah.
trying to help the industry go forward.
Yeah, one thing for me there is that people started talking to each other, becoming friends and sharing. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s when I got started, no one told you how they did anything.
That's
You know,
right.
everything was a big secret. But starting with the Canon Explorers, and people started telling you, well, here's how I did it, because it's still your vision. I can tell you all the settings I used on something, all the equipment, and you're not going to take the same picture. So the sharing.
Oh, and I think the dinners were a big part of it, because over dinners with wine and food, it basically loosened people up, and people that like, I'm not going to talk to him, he might steal a job from me. There was a tremendous camaraderie that was developed. I mean,
Well, the other thing that was interesting is that Michael did gather a wide range of characters with a wide range of disciplines. I mean, Greg is celebrity portraiture, but Seth Resnick is kind of like adventure landscape, although he was editorial at that time. And Jack Resnicki likes to shoot kids. So, I mean, came from a wide range. James Knockway, just a remarkable photojournalist and a real nice guy. So,
did you have Dwayne Michaels too, Mike?
Yes.
Dwayne
Yeah.
Michaels. I mean, we're talking about serious, but real photographers.
Yeah, Dwayne's pretty amazing.
Susan
Yeah.
Mazalis and Sheila Metzner.
Yeah, I was going to say
And
you had
Joyce
women in the
Tennyson.
group too.
And you know, you talked about Helmut Newton before. Let it be told now, there were two photographers that I wanted in the Explorers of Light. All right, that I wanted to invite in. And when I told Canon the two photographers I wanted, they said I could only have one. All right, and they really were swaying me over to one versus the other because of the type of imagery that the one that they told me I really couldn't take was doing. So I picked Sarah Moon, who's brilliant, but I also wanted Helmut Newton.
That's great.
And then there was Jay.
And then there
Well,
was
you never
Jay.
got Jay.
No, Mr. Nikon wasn't going to come across.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, today it's all built on numbers and the
and it was
Instagram
Pete.
and not on talent. So
And there was Pete.
Pete Turner,
I mean,
Yeah,
there was
Pete
Pete
Turner.
and all of his assistants.
Eric
All
Miola.
of his assistants became Explorers of Light.
Sure.
Olarezu and Anthony Edgeworth.
Well,
and so forth and so on. Yep. But the more important thing is we became a family and friends to this day. To this day. That's what I loved about it. And it just to clear up something, I was a photographer with a studio in Manhattan that did commercial advertising. All right. So when I closed the studio down and the industry was taking a dump, I went to Nikon for this idea, and they turned me down. So I went to Canon, and they honestly didn't know Arnold Newman from Alfred E. Newman. That's a fact. They had no idea what the hell I was doing, but I knew exactly what I wanted and how I wanted to do it. And the main thing is that everybody had to like each other. Forget the photography. Everybody had to like each other to make this program what I was hoping it would become. And it did. That's all.
Yeah, I remember the early 80s, Saatchi and Saatchi were buying up all the ad agencies. That's when I was in New York. And it's like from week to week, I didn't know who I was working for.
Well, it became easy for me as a photographer to be able to speak with photographers about what I envisioned. And it was very easy sell. It really was. You know, so.
Well, we salute you, Mike.
I'm happy.
Thank you for everything.
Greg,
I give you the one finger salute, Mike.
Yeah, we're still
one other thing.
recording. He can't give his real line.
Well, when I was in full force, I mean, I did that for 10 years. I used to get calls from Seth Resnick and Shiwi and I think Greg, where they had an audience, and they would call on their cell phones, and they would just have the entire audience say, "F you, Newler," and I knew that the show at that point was successful, that they were giving to the people across the country. I mean, that's what I missed. It was the camaraderie that when we all got together and did something good for the industry.
Yeah, we had a good time.
Cool.
And of course, I ended up getting kicked out of the Canon Explorers
It
for
was
saying,
after I left.
huh?
It was after I had been excised from Canon.
Yeah, well, to be honest, that was at the point that I was going to resign instead of keep signing that bullshit contract anyway. So
Anyway, enough about Canon.
Yeah. Well, it's quarter
Greg,
after 11. I know that Greg has
wait a
another
minute,
call.
Wait a minute. Hey, Greg,
Oh.
Greg, have you been in touch with Dano?
Yeah, of course.
He's like on the East Coast. He's like falling off the face of the earth. I call him. I send him emails, and like he's like the one.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't talked to him in the last couple of weeks, but I have talked to him. Sure.
Okay. Well, next time you talk to him, tell him.
I'll tell him.
Tell
Okay.
him. Okay.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much.
And thank you.
For this.
This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you, Gary, for tuning in, buddy.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure.
All right. See all you guys. I am going to run.
Be well.
Take
Be good.
care. Thank
Be
you.
good. Take
Be
care.
well. Thanks,
All right,
John.
Jeff.
You're
All right.
welcome.
Take care, Jeff.